Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me and see me. Some people are still just coming in, so I'm just going to start off slowly, but welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people joining us today for this important discussion. My name's Rebecca Atkinson. I'm the event programmer and content editor for the Museum Association, and I'll be facilitating today. My visual description is a white cis woman with brown hair, and I'm wearing a yellow jumper and a hot water bottle, which is out of sight. Before I hand over to our chair, Victoria Hume, I just have a few quick housekeeping announcements to share with you. So first of all, this event is being run on Zoom meetings, and we'd love it if you keep your cameras on if you're able to, but do please mute yourself unless asked otherwise. If you require closed captioning, then you can request this now by the live transcript button on your bottom menu bar, and I will turn that on in a moment. We'll be using the chat function today. You can respond to the issues raised and ask questions. For the latter, it'd be great if you could put Q&A at the start of your question, and if applicable, let us know if it's for a particular speaker. The event will remain open until we close, in an hour's time. So if you need to leave or your internet drops out, then you can rejoin again by the waiting room. And we are in fact recording this discussion today, and it will be available for you to rewatch next week if you so wish. Finally, this is a wellbeing event, so please do look after yourself today, and I'm going to put a link to our wellbeing hub in the chat in a moment. But first, I'm going to hand over to our event chair, Victoria Hume, who is the Director of the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And I'm just going to spotlight you. Apologies.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. Really nice to see you all. As Rebecca said, I'm the Exec Director of the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. I'm a white, middle-aged woman with sort of greying brown hair. I'm wearing a pair of black-rimmed glasses, and I've got a red roll neck jumper on. So I'm really excited about this topic. Since we started as an organisation in 2018, the well-being of the people delivering creative health work has really emerged as a massive priority for our members around the country, and that's been backed up with our own research. We have a resource on wellbeing, and we run an award every year that's dedicated to celebrating organisations that are doing really well in that space, and that's helped us learn a lot more about what best practice might look like, which has been great. But for me, there's also a relationship between the well-being of the people doing the work and the communities or individuals that we're trying to work with. And if we don't get it right, if we don't look after our own well-being, in some ways we're reinforcing that kind of them and us situation between, and the idea of an invulnerable institution working with vulnerable communities. So this topic, I think, is really important to changing those power structures. That is all I'm going to say on the topic for now, because we have three proper experts to speak to you. We're going to hear from Ben, Laura and Tamsin, and then we'll have questions after that. There's quite a lot of space for questions, so do think about what you'd like to ask our three speakers, and put your questions in the chat, or you can put your hand up when we come to that part of the meeting, and I'll try and pick you out and bring you into the conversation. But I'm going to hand over first of all to Ben Middleton, who is the National Secretary for Prospect. That's the trade union for professionals, and obviously many heritage members within the trade union. He's going to talk about their work on workforce wellbeing. Over to you, Ben.
Many thanks, Victoria, and hello everyone. Very much a pleasure to be able to join you today and to share a discussion around well-being. My visual description is I'm a white 50-year-old cis male with what would probably be described as thinning brown hair and a longish beard the wrong side of unruly, and I'm wearing a brown woolen suit jacket and brown spectacles. There's a growing body of research, particularly through the pandemic, that has highlighted the general well-being benefits that heritage and heritage attractions have. For example, a Scottish study has shown that people attending museums or libraries are around 20% more likely to report good health. And another study has found that the positive mental health aspects of visiting museums and heritage sites is most pronounced in areas of high deprivation. Comprehensive reviews have found that the historic places and assets and interventions associated with them have a wide range of beneficial impacts on the physical, mental and social well-being of individuals and communities. And in the order of about 80% of people agree that where heritage sites and projects are, they make their town or city a better place to live, with key benefits listed as supporting local economies, making local areas more physically attractive, encouraging local pride and increasing social cohesion. So we can see that heritage as a sector has a really wide-ranging positive benefit. And this is somewhat and sadly increasingly starkly at odds with the fact that whilst visiting and participating in heritage sites is good for most people, for a lot of, and particularly our members, heritage professionals working across the sector, it has over a number of years become an increasingly difficult, stressed, and sometimes painful place to work, because of a combination of funding issues, low pay, overwork, under-resourcing, and morale issues. And as you might imagine, as a trade union, these are subjects that are very close to our heart. We work both individually and collectively to try and improve and protect the terms, conditions of members in all the sectors where we operate, heritage being the one that I'm sort of lead responsible for. And that's particularly true when we look at those wider wellbeing benefits also, whether that's to do with tackling discrimination, looking at other sort of personal grievance issues, or the broader swathe of those elements of terms and conditions that make up such a significant portion of the value and the well-being that people derive from their work. One of the major pieces of work we launched back last year was what we've called our World-Class Heritage Second-Class Pay campaign, which draws out that obviously so much of well-being is linked to the terms and conditions and the reward and recognition one gets from undertaking the work. And we know from that research that heritage is stark in the sort of disproportionality between the level of skills, knowledge and experience that tenured professionals typically have, and the extent to which this really isn't reflected in the pay and general reward package that people get from working in those roles. And that's been particularly compounded most recently by what we're seeing with sort of double-digit inflation and the very high cost of living pressures. I've got a few very brief slides to run you through which bring out some of the key points of that research, and I'm very happy to make this slide deck and indeed the two reports that they refer to available for colleagues to look at more broadly. Rebecca, could I have the first of my slides, please, and then move?
Yes, just bear with me because there might be a slight delay sharing, but I'll get them up now.
So as a prefacing comment, one of the pieces of work we did building on a general pay and conditions survey was a cost of living survey we ran in the autumn, where we had a very significant response rate of over 2,500 members, so in the order of 25% plus of our overall sector membership. And if I can have the next slide, please. And some of the key takeaways in relation to well-being were that...
Sorry, I can't see the button to move it on. Bear with
That's
me.
okay, I'll just bring it up on my side. So one of the questions we asked was, how often does the cost of living make you anxious? And for all salary ranges between up to 20,000, 20 to 35,000 and over 35,000, it was significant the extent to which people were concerned about on a regular basis, whether that was every day, once a week or once a month, about the cost of living. Next slide, please. And then one of the other key concerns we saw. I'm
sorry, really sorry. It just keeps going back to the same slide. Sorry.
Okay. Do you want me to share from mine?
No, I'll do it here as long as you don't mind the fact that it's not full screen.
Okay, no, that's fine. We asked also, has there been an increase in workload? And across the board, there was variously reported at least small increases pretty much everywhere, but actually a very high degree of what people were reporting as significant increases in workload. And then linked to that, On the next slide, please, we asked the question about whether people have less time to complete their work. And again, pretty much across the board, regardless of which role or which type of setting people were in, people were reporting that whether it was daily, a few times a week, or every week routinely, everyone was reporting to a significant degree that yes, they had far less time available to complete the work they had set. And then in a similar linked way, on the final slide, I want to just present briefly to people today, we asked whether there were enough staff in their work area to complete core tasks. And again, the overwhelming response was that no, there weren't. Some people reported, but no more than 30% at the best answer that yes, there were. So on average, in the order of sort of 50 to 70% of those respondents, and particularly those within curator, gardening, collections, conservation, librarian and ranger roles, that there simply weren't enough staff to meet the available asks on their time. You can stop sharing now, please, Rebecca. And I think in total, what that paints is very much a picture where not only do we understand that salaries are very low, but also through the pandemic in particular, the real pressures have increased around the amount of time people have to do their work, the level of resources they have, and all of this was contributing to much higher reported levels of stress, anxiety, and a general downturn in worker well-being pretty much across the sector in all areas. And a slide we haven't shown, but which is within the wider research, that again I think is very stark, is that this was leading a significant number of practicing professionals within the sector to feel as though they had no option but to seek alternative work, either within the sector, but with an increasing degree of common response actually outside of the sector altogether, which of course will only compound those workforce pressures if there are fewer skilled professionals available to take on roles. Thank you. That's all I was going to cover at this point.
Thanks, Ben. That was great. Such a helpful overview of the sort of wider sector implications of all of this. I'm going to hand straight over to Laura, if that's okay. Laura Crossley, who is an independent consultant working in the museum sector, who's going to reflect on her own impressions around workforce wellbeing. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Victoria, and thank you to the MA for inviting me to be on the panel. I think this is a really vital conversation about one of the most important challenges to our sector at this time. I've become really interested in workforce wellbeing, not because I came from that background, but because I work in museums, and it seems to work in museums, you need to know all about wellbeing to support yourself and to support your friends. I'm really privileged in my role. I've been a consultant for a long time. So I've got friends across the sector and I talk to people across the sector. And increasingly, we talk about, problems at work and well-being problems. I think, I don't want to, cast aspersions, but I think that probably all of us either have suffered from that or know someone who's suffered from poor well-being as a result of working in museums. Things like mental and physical health issues, lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem, exhaustion and burnout. Workforce wellbeing's always been important, but I would say it's never been more important than now, as we're all still recovering from the effects of COVID, which is still, going on. That's had a massive impact on our wellbeing as individuals and also on the sector. As Ben was alluding to, we've seen redundancies, we've seen people on furlough and having to come back from that. We've seen people working through the pandemic and suffering from burnout. We've seen organisations having to very quickly pivot their strategy, and obviously when organisations don't really have a clear vision about where they're going, that can have a huge impact on staff wellbeing and staff workloads. So I really think, we've got to tackle this now. It can feel a little bit hopeless because we talk about this so much and it sometimes feels like nothing happens. I think it's great the MA have picked this up, but I would really like to put out a positive message that I really feel like if we all work together, we can make things better. So why is wellbeing important for me? Well, firstly, like Ben talks about as well, I do think there's a major hypocrisy that we talk a lot about looking after our audiences, but we don't seem to think it matters so much to look after our staff. It is the law, like it is you have a duty of care towards your employees. It's the law to make sure that you're providing safe workplaces that support people. It's about also getting the best out of people. We can't expect people to be at their best if their well-being's, not as good as it should be. So it's also really good for organisations. And I would like to make the point that lack of good wellbeing practices can have serious implications. It can cause genuine trauma. It can cause genuine mental and physical health issues. So just a few points from me. Firstly, sometimes when I talk about well-being, I think that people think of it sometimes as a fluffy term, like what does it really mean? It's not fluffy. It's about actually making sure that our workplaces keep people well and supported. It's not about, it's great to have a well-being program. It's great to offer that to employees. It's great to have a well-being strategy. But from the people I speak to, the people whose well-being isn't great, it's not because there's not a well-being program, it's because they're working long hours, they're being bullied and harassed, the expectations on them are ridiculous and they can't keep up with the workload. It's those structural issues that actually really impact well-being in the workplace. And although well-being programs are great, they are just a sticking plaster over a gaping wound if you're also working in a toxic organisation. Everybody deserves to feel psychologically and physically safe in the workplace. And we have to really look for organisational norms. It's sometimes not that people are being malicious, although maybe sometimes they are. But I think sometimes, if it's normal or expected that everyone works long hours, then if you come into that organisation, you will also probably start working long hours over the time that you're meant to work because you look around and see everybody else doing that. If it's normal to not be able to speak up about issues because you've seen if someone does speak up, then, they maybe, feel like they need to leave a company, then that's an organisational norm that means that, there's that sort of culture of fear that means people can't speak up. It also might mean that staff are being taken advantage of. I do have a massive problem sometimes with the phrase "and other duties," which I think does a lot of heavy lifting. It's great to have that phrase. I understand why we have it, but at the same time, if that means you're being asked to do things that are completely against your job description, completely out of role, and that most of your job seems to be and other duties, that's a real issue for me. The MA research that I know Tamsin's going to talk about showed that line managers can make a massive difference to our well-being. I've certainly had, good and bad line managers and I felt a real positive or negative benefit depending on what that manager's been like. I would say we really need to recruit people to management positions who can manage and lead people. Technical skills relating to a specialist area are important, but actually it's your job to lead and manage people. The technical skills, maybe for me, aren't as important as being able to support your team. We need to provide much better training to line managers and to leaders to help them to support people. And I would also say that line managers and leaders should be measured. Their performance should be measured on how well they're supporting their team. I've sometimes heard people say, do your job, don't support your team, spend time doing your job. And it's like, but it is my job. My job is to support my team. And also, I think that managers and leaders should raise issues from their team. They should feel empowered to do that. And I'd say if they don't, I'd question whether the organisational culture is that great if you feel like you're never allowed to raise any issues that your team are raising. I think we need to provide some additional support for people who are working with vulnerable groups. So people working in community roles, that's already can be a huge emotional burden. Are we providing sufficient support to help them? As I said before, getting this wrong can really have serious implications for people's mental and physical health. You do have a lawful and ethical duty to get that right for the sake of the people who work for you. And also, you need to get it right for your organisation because tribunals can happen. You can be reported to the Charities Commission. You can get in a lot of trouble if you don't look after your staff. So do it for the people who work for you because that is your ethical duty, but it's also a legal obligation to your organisation to get it right. And just a final thing, a final bit of food for thought. I would really like to see funders either not funding or withdrawing funding to organisations that aren't supporting staff wellbeing. In my view, you know, we have to ask whether organisations that are having negative impacts on staff wellbeing should be rewarded, and it is a reward, with funding, whether that's for small projects or, you know, or bigger pots of funding. I would love to see funders doing wellbeing audits as part of funding applications, talking to staff confidentially and asking, is this a good place to work? And if it is funding that lasts for, you know, more than a short period of time, going back into staff and saying, you know, is this organisation a good place to work? I really don't think that it's great if organisations are awarded and on the surface looking like they're brilliant, and then actually the staff in that organisation are just not having a good time at all. But finally, as I said, to end on a positive point, there are lots of issues, but I really believe there's lots of people here today. There's lots of people who really want things to change, and I really believe that we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. That was great. I agree with you about both the need for change, and I think there is real momentum around this now. To your point about funders, I'm quite encouraged by seeing a bit of a slow shift there in recognition of the importance of looking after well-being of the people who are delivering the work. So I do think things are moving in the right direction. On which note, I'm going to hand over to Tamsin to talk about specifically the work that the MA has been doing in this area and your research and campaign. Over to you, Tamsin.
Brilliant, wonderful. Thank you very much. Really lovely to see so many familiar faces in the audience. And that was one of the questions that we asked before we opened the room, as it were, is who actually is in the audience? And are we always preaching to the converted? Are we preaching to those individuals that have had a negative wellbeing experience? And who are the movers and shakers that may well have the power and the resource to affect change? And I agree with Laura. I think we can all work together to affect change. But one of the things that we're very clear about from an MA perspective is that all too often workforce wellbeing and the solutions to that are leveled at the individual. So how can you become more resilient? How can you manage your workload more effectively? And what we're very committed to doing is highlighting that there are clear cultural, structural, institutional areas of work that if we get those right to begin with, we don't have to ask at an individual level, because the workplace becomes a far more fruitful, tolerant, welcoming, supportive space. So I am, as you can imagine, delighted to be here to talk about a subject very close to my heart. The Museums Association as a professional body is committed to supporting everyone that works in museums, and that includes freelancers and volunteers. And we continue to campaign for inclusive and diverse museums. So we want them to prioritise fair working conditions. And Louise, I can see you're in the audience, that includes pay as well as workforce wellbeing. Within this, we define well-being as the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy, acknowledging throughout that well-being is affected by our experience of life and our experience of work. We see good workforce wellbeing as an indicator of a healthy and productive organisation, and as such, apart from the legal, moral, and ethical argument, should be seen as a priority for leaders and funders. Our recent workforce wellbeing research builds on our previous work. So please look at our website, Sticks and Stones research into bullying in museums, the resources that we have on our wellbeing and redundancy hubs, the direct support we did give during the pandemic through our Facebook groups, our recently published Front of House Charter for Change that looks specifically at the experience and treatment of front of house colleagues. And wellbeing was, among a range of other aspects, identified as one of the key principles of practice that organisations should engage with to improve that experience of work, to improve attraction and retention, which from our recent research into pay in museums is a particular challenge for many museums at the moment. And I've just mentioned pay. So our publication around pay in museums was launched and is available on our website. So please take a look. And the reason I'm highlighting that piece of research as well as the wellbeing research is that it's really important that when we talk about workforce well-being, we think about it holistically. We have to remember there are a range of factors that may affect well-being. You know, an area that we have explicitly explored in the research, and I will show you the top 5 factors that affect negative well-being shortly. But, you know, it's very hard to think to be joyful and happy in work when you can't necessarily put food on the table or fuel in your radiators. So we do need to think about workforce well-being more broadly. And that broader understanding enables organisations to think about ways to address sort of bigger issues, those systemic and institutional issues, as well as responding to those individual needs. So, in terms of the research, thank you everyone who completed the questionnaire. We had a phenomenal response. So we had over 650 responses, and that gave us at the MA a real confidence in our reflections around the state of the sector, and also really helped us inform our plans for 2023 and beyond. So for example, we've had discussions around training specifically for managers to enable them to think about appropriate workforce wellbeing initiatives and support at that individual level, because we know it's so important, as well as working more collaboratively with other individuals and groups in the sector. So what did the research say, and why is it important? I will have a couple of slides to give you some metrics in a moment, but just wanted to highlight, you know, the aim of the research was to give ourselves a current picture and to identify those factors that were affecting individual well-being, and to begin to explore ideas and priorities. If you have a fantastic idea, if you have that silver bullet and that we haven't thought about it, please do share it. Please send your ideas and suggestions to me, tamsin@museumsassociation.org. Following the research, that informed our thinking in terms of what our role is with all of this and how we can support museums to address wellbeing. So again, if you look on our website, our campaign aims are really clear. We want to work with museums to raise the awareness and showcase good practice in this area. We want to improve workforce wellbeing through advice, support and programs. And also very clearly, and it's so lovely that it's already been mentioned by all 3 previous speakers, that link between workforce wellbeing and the role and impact that a healthy, rested workforce can play then in the interactions they have with visitors, audiences and communities, and specifically those projects that centre around community wellbeing. In terms of our findings, we found that, and perhaps not surprisingly, that people had less good satisfaction in a workplace than at home. And when we played this back, there was some suggestion that with everything that's going on in the world, surely people would find some solace going into work and they'll be protected from the pandemic, cost of living, the Ukraine war, but actually that isn't borne out in the research. So people's well-being is still less positive within a workplace situation. The factors that affect it are very much around excessive demands. So it does resonate with the prospect research, and also not feeling valued or recognised. And that can be verbally, that can be through remuneration and pay, but that whole sense of having a sense of being valued and looked after. And very much a third of our respondents said that they didn't feel their organisation even cared about them. Can you imagine going to an organisation, I'm sure a number of you can, that you feel that the organisation hasn't really got your back, isn't prioritising you, but is prioritising their outputs and outcomes. We found that museums adopted a variety of approaches to try and deal with that, the most common being employee assistance programmes and mental health first aiders. So, what are we saying? What are we recommending? Our recommendations are on our website. I think the most clear recommendation I can get across as much as anything is that we want organisations, and that includes museums and funders, sector support organisations and beyond, but at an organisational level, to commit to creating a culture of care, prioritising well-being for all, and being really proactive in centering well-being in all planning, or budgeting, risk assessment, decision making. And primarily, if you centre wellbeing at that point, you can ensure that activities are sufficiently resourced to deliver success without feeling as if there are excessive demands. We've got 10 specific recommendations around workforce wellbeing. And then in addition to that, we have highlighted as part of this research the particular aspects around those roles that may, because of the nature of the work, be exposed to more challenging environments, thoughts and experiences. So those roles that work in spaces where people have experienced trauma and other adverse experiences, we need to make sure that those individuals, those community engagement professionals, are supported to a greater degree through induction, professional development, and also sufficient resource and capacity and supervision to help them. So I'm just going to close by sharing a couple of slides just so that you can see rather than listen to me talk about this subject. And I'm just going to get there. Can everyone see that slide? So these are the 5 factors that people felt most affected their well-being negatively. So 53% highlighted experienced excessive demands. My sense is that we were doing, 5 things before the pandemic. We then did a new 5 things during the pandemic. And now in 2022, 2023, we're doing 10 things. And with a reduction in real terms staffing hours and roles. People didn't feel valued or recognised. They didn't feel they were paid as part of that. They felt that there were cultures that affected their well-being, and that could be a function of senior as well as lower management. And certainly this whole idea of progression and feeling stuck contributed negatively to their well-being. In terms of what did museums do? Brilliant, 57% of an assistance programme where we've got all of these other things in place. For me, only 32% of organisations had a wellbeing strategy. And the reason I feel that's problematic is that it lends organisations to adopt a piecemeal approach, an ad hoc approach, without thinking very clearly around the interactions around all of our experience of work. We pull on one lever, but forget about this one. And without having an integrated, holistic approach, there's a real risk that we spend valuable money and time adopting disjointed and piecemeal activities that don't affect real change, just affect a very tiny response at a point in time. Which leads me on to the final part, because it wouldn't be appropriate without I highlighted our other really big piece of research one more time, is our pay and salary research. These are just some of the factors we asked in the survey and the research around well-being, and you can see very clearly we cannot possibly talk about workforce well-being without also talking about remuneration. And on that note, I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Victoria. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tamsin. That was brilliant. And actually, it's the perfect segue. Although I'm just going to remind our attendees to put any questions in the chat. I've been reading the chat as we're going along, which has been really interesting. It feels as if there's a bit of a theme emerging from the chat. In certainly the first few comments that were made, which was to do, I'm going off script a bit, apologies everybody, I'm not going to go with this with the questions that we talked about before, but the chat was talking about, I suppose you could summarize it as questions around power and tokenism. So the reason it was a good segue, Tamsin, is that you were talking about disjointed strategies and piecemeal work, and I think that was coming through quite a lot in the chat at the beginning. So it feels as if there's a common understanding that well-being, that we need to be looking at well-being, but perhaps it's not being dealt with in a thorough way. Perhaps there's, a mention in a policy somewhere, but it's not necessarily being implemented through the way an organisation works. So what do we need to do to get beyond a sort of tick box exercise in institutions? What are the levers for that? You talked about, Louise, you talked about funders, and that feels like one possible lever, but I wonder whether anybody on the panel has any thoughts about how you get beyond the tick box in this area. Ben, go for it.
Very much as you might expect me to say, as I'm a trade union official, but so much of addressing well-being issues comes down to the extent to which staff are actually empowered and have a voice that is able to be listened to. And one of the best means by which to achieve that within a workplace setting is to join a trade union, to organise collectively, to ensure that as a group of staff, you have a voice where an employer is much more obliged to have to engage and work with you in a much more level playing field way, so that the sorts of mechanisms you get, reflecting some of the comments in the chat, are not ones that are simply tick box or tokenistic, but actually properly reflect what staff are saying they feel they need and what would be most useful in actually making real positive change.
Thanks, Ben. Does anybody else want to jump in on that point? Laura or Tamsin? Laura.
I think as well, I mean, I suppose this isn't a structural thing, but it is just about, I suppose, following for Ben, it's about workers having a voice and feeling like they can, talk about their concerns, because that is something that some people sometimes can't do, and so concerns just don't get anywhere. But also it's, I was going to say talk about having policies, but it's not just about having policies, it's actually using those policies, because there are examples where someone's got a policy but they don't actually follow it. It is about everybody having a commitment, I think, as Tamsin was saying, to really think about wellbeing as a central thing that should go across every bit of an organisation. And part of that is about having people who listen empathetically to your concerns. Your concerns might not be, you sometimes speak to people and feel like, well, they just don't kind of get what I'm saying. They're not experiencing what I'm experiencing, and so you can feel like you're sort of hitting your head against a brick wall. Whereas actually, if people were a bit more empathetic and listened and genuinely tried to deal with those concerns, I think that would make a huge difference. Because I think if concerns are never acted on, it just leads to this culture of feeling like, what's the point? Just feeling really disempowered, and people leave and they don't necessarily give exit interviews, or they're too scared to say why they're leaving. And so the problems just go on and on and on. And as well as funders, I think, having an impact, I think, we also need to look to trustees, to local councils, to whoever is, has a lot of power within a museum, because they have to, from the top down, take real responsibility for wellbeing.
Thanks, Laura. And when you were speaking earlier, you made some really good points about organisational cultures, I thought, and sort of organisational behaviours and how they replicate themselves. Tamsin, do you want to come in?
Contributing to my wellbeing issue is that my camera stopped working, so I apologise. I can't smile at you, and I've got red lipstick on and everything. So I wrote down top down. So thanks, Laura, for highlighting that. I mean, I just think right from the get-go, Board of Trustees, organisations should be very clear and proactive around what wellbeing is. So it's not about, oh my goodness, we've had a complaint and a grievance about wellbeing, we now need to do something. It's not like, oh my goodness, did you see what happened in that museum? What are we going to do now? So, whilst horizon scanning is really important, but there should be a proactive annual risk assessment and acknowledgement on the organisational risk register around what wellbeing impacts are in terms of attraction, retention, turnover, attendance, performance levels, never mind the moral and ethical argument. Just from a business benefit perspective, I think organisations need to be thinking about what workforce wellbeing looks like. And as much as I would like everyone to sign up to the human part of that, for some people it will have to be the business benefit argument that gets them to take notice. And we have to use whatever we need to use to ensure that well-being of our workforce is improved. And if that is identifying return on investment and all those other things, or potential reputational risk, all of that stuff, I think that's how we begin to make that strategic and embedded change, and it comes from the top.
Thanks, Tamsin. While I've got you, there's a couple of questions that I think are specifically for you.
Okay.
One is about, could workforce wellbeing be added into the Code of Ethics, which I think must be the MA Code of Ethics. And the second one is about the points that you made about community engagement work at the conference and emotional labour. Any advice on how employees within organisations can start introducing, I'm not going to paraphrase this, as well as the new idea of integrating wellbeing, capacity, stress into risk assessments as a legal health and safety requirement? How do employees within organisations start introducing those things if they're not already in place?
So 2 fantastic questions. If my colleague India was on the call, I'm sure she would have a view, but we are reviewing the Code of Ethics for museums. We are about to embark on that process with our Ethics Committee, and my colleague India is leading on that. Currently, as the Code of Ethics exists, there's only one bullet point that relates to workforce, 3.7, which is about having a transparent and fair workforce policy. I think certainly from my perspective, I think there are opportunities for that particular commitment to be expanded. I think we always have to think about making a document and a standard and a framework usable. So I think that there is a limit about how big a code of ethics or any sort of standard could develop. Where do we draw the line? And I mean, I'd like to see workforce wellbeing also play out far more clearly as part of the accreditation process. I think workforce could become through far more strongly there under those particular principles. So I think the review is there and is about to start, and I'm sure there'll be a number of conversations and certainly consultations with people around what could be included in the next version. So please use your participation to get your views across. In terms of the other question, you have got me on my other favourite subject, which is risk assessment and health and safety. I mean, again, I just think often when you're working in a sector or culture that has very clear and good practices, and I would say, certainly in my experience, health and safety and the whole idea about method statements and risk assessments, certainly around exhibition design and collections moves, are absolutely there, you know, manual handling, COSH, all of those sort of things. So we already have an infrastructure, we already have a mechanism and a commitment to health and safety that we can then capitalise more broadly when we're talking about, as Laura said, the fluffy perceived aspects of well-being. So whether you've got a health and safety advisor, whether you've got a health and safety organisation that's retained, whether you've got a union representative that focuses on health and safety. I mean, there are lots of people within organisations that can help you. All it is about saying, okay, when we're identifying our hazards extend to be beyond the physicalness of a building or the physical components of a process or task. How can we begin to talk about the potential hazards that are psychosocial? And the session from conference, if you're a member, I think all of you will be members here, is on our website. And it just asks people to start reflecting on using that language. And I'm certainly a believer of trying to affect from the top of the organisation and using those mechanics. But if you're not getting any purchase there, there's nothing stopping you from adopting good practice in your own sphere of influence, in your own function, your own department, your own team. And you know, as soon as you start doing it and it gets well received, guess what? The organisation wants to jump on that bandwagon too.
That's really helpful. And there's been some great comments and links coming into the chat as well. A really good point from Sarah about funders requiring risk registers as part of reporting requirements and including workforce wellbeing on those risk registers, which is something we've done as an organisation. And that has been enormously helpful to us because it just gets discussed. You can't not discuss it. There was a really good question earlier about freelancers. Obviously, that's a subject close to my heart because most of our members are freelance. And how do we ensure that the freelancers who are working in the heritage sector get the same kind of support in this area around wellbeing? I would add to that because often the community engagement work relies very heavily on freelancers. So any thoughts from anyone on the panel on that one, do jump in. Laura.
I can jump in. I'm a freelancer, so so firstly I would say I think we've come a long way since I started freelancing years ago, but I do think there still needs to be a bit more understanding of the role of freelancers and consultants. You know, the person who's freelancing for you isn't working in-house for you. They can't be available every day of the week at any time of day because they are contracted to do a certain amount of days. So I think there has to be really clear briefs and comms. I don't think that's malicious at all. I think it's just, you know, people under pressure and then you kind of see the freelancer as part of the team when they are, but actually it's a very separate role. it's, you know, for me, something that would massively improve my well-being is if people paid me on time all the time, because that's the biggest thing that makes me nervous when I know that I've got bills to pay and someone's late paying me. So I think it is just, it's showing that respect to freelancers and consultants and really understanding, you know, what their role is and how best to support them. And then myself as a freelancer, I'm actually in a union. I'd never not be in a union. So it is possible for freelancers to, it can be very isolating, and it's really, you know, it can be awful if you feel like there's a problem with a client or something, but that's why I've always stayed in a union, because I've been able to get really good advice from them.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. Any thoughts from Ben or Tamsin on that one?
Just to echo, really, although people often associate sort of trade union membership with permanent employees embedded in workplaces, that there is a lot around providing advice and support on contracts, how they're structured, on issues around tax and the like, that a lot of our freelance members, particularly within creative industries, but also a growing number within heritage, I think, do benefit from. I think it's also fair to say that there's probably a wide range of experience across freelancers, from those reflecting on comments at a previous roundtable event we had, who were very clear that they were in charge of their time and were confident and comfortable with what they do for what they get paid. But there's also a swathe whereby freelancers can feel that they're at the worst, sort of most precarious end of employment, and in order to secure enough work, often then find themselves trapped in a position of feeling obliged to do anything and everything that's asked of them in order to maintain a level of contract. So it's about making sure people aren't subject to those form of kind of often unintended, but nonetheless kind of contractual abuses, where there's just this understanding that if you have a vocational interest in what you do, you'll kind of do it for free, won't you? Whereas actually that, as Laura says, is very difficult to do if you're having to juggle several contracts across several different employer areas.
Thanks, Ben. And a follow-up question around short-term contracts, casual staff who how do we bring in people for example, training if they're not members of staff? Does that happen? Are there examples where freelancers are offered training? I'm just going to answer that a little bit for myself, because we do a lot of work around this, and there are, from the sort of creative health side, I do know of quite a number of organisations that offer paid training to freelancers, and that is part of what we would consider to be good practice. I don't know how common that is across heritage and museums, but it's an interesting point. How do you bring freelance and casual staff into those sorts of structures so that they can benefit from that kind of work?
I can.
Tamsin.
Yeah, I can just I mean, I think casual staff are different from freelancers. I think it's always important to think about making sure the terminology is correct. Not that I necessarily think we should treat them differently. But my reflection would be, certainly, you know, if you're a fixed term post, if you're a 0 hours contract, and I know there's a huge amount of discussion about whether that's helpful or not, different people think it is, but I'm not going to get into that debate. There is something, if you are working and contributing to the direction of travel and achievement of an organisation, why are we creating these? Well, they're a casual member of staff, so they don't get access to this. I think we should be adopting a single status approach in terms of employment practices around certainly the basics around access to wellbeing provision. I think if you're a freelancer or a casual person that perhaps isn't scheduled to be in on a particular day where training is, if again that's part of the team building for a project, if that's part of the skill set for the project, you know, that will already have been built into the budget plan, or if it should have been, it should. So that whole idea about involving and inviting freelancers to training and development that would support their well-being as part of a project, I think should just be part of any sort of grant application. And I don't think it's necessary. I don't think we need to think about it separately. I think if we just said everybody that is working with and towards, we will do this for them, it would get across and make a change more readily.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm just checking the chat for messages. I'm hoping that I've covered quite a lot of what is coming up in the chat. If I'm missing crucial things, somebody please alert me. I did want to come back to one of the questions that we were talking about. Oh yes, I know what it was. What do you think, to our panelists, what do you think we might learn from other sectors that maybe are doing this well? Are you aware of other sectors that are doing well in this area that you think we should be learning from? Ben?
Again, it might seem like a kind of self-evident answer, but I think those employers and those sectors where they properly recognise the value of doing this well and are therefore content to put the necessary resources in to be able to do it well, both in terms of money, but also staffing and time, have recognised that all too often that is a far smaller cost than the otherwise cost of constantly kind of looking to re-recruit staff, dealing with increased absenteeism, lower morale, etc. So it's around, you know, as with anything in life, really, if you're going to do it well, you need to invest in it, rather than saying, we know this is a good idea, let's see if we can do it on a shoestring, and then wondering why it doesn't work. You know, or adding it on as an important mission strand to everything people are already doing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's like good and bad in every sector, but Ben will know more than me. But like, I definitely agree about reward and recognition. We don't like, I think that's just very, very poor in this sector, both in terms of pay, but also just, you know, general reward. And it's rare to meet anyone who says that they're, you know, even just regularly thanked for doing things, which is the lowest really form of reward and recognition that we should all expect. And then I know, you know, I'm certainly not saying the private sector's perfect at all, but, you know, a friend of mine who works in a very, very corporate insurance firm where you'd think that it was immense amounts of pressure. His office, he can go in when he wants, he's trusted. No one's saying, why weren't you here at 9 o'clock? There's a real sense of like him being trusted and not micromanaged. It doesn't matter if he leaves at 4. I think that would be great. A friend of mine who works in another public sector is at the moment on a wellbeing retreat, because it was noticed that, you know, she was kind of, you know, her wellbeing had suffered because of work, and so she's been given access to counselling. She's gone on this retreat. It is just about, you know, investing in people, as Ben said. I would absolutely love it if, as well as things like EAPs, I noticed there was a question about EAPs, and I think they're great, but they're not the only solution. They can be a bit mixed. But also, you know, why don't we allow people to have access to counsellors as well as occupational health? We could do all of these things to support people on a day-to-day basis that wouldn't take a great deal of money, especially if it's something that could be available across.
I've just got a tiny thing to add. So I agree. I think there's good practice and less good practice across a variety of sectors. I think we have to blend the sort of organisational broad brush intervention with individual level support. So that whole menu approach, I think, is really important. How do we adopt a menu approach for wellbeing? One, by enabling line managers to have latitude to deliver wellbeing solutions to their individual members of staff that meet the individual members of staff needs, rather than only being able to do what the corporate or the organisation makes a decision about. I think investment's important, but even if you have lots of money and you invest in these programs, if it is performative, it will never make a difference. And what I do see often is organisations getting on a bandwagon, highlighting we're doing this, but actually it is about lip service and visibility rather than a genuine commitment, care and support for human beings. So that's something I think is really important.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tamsin. So we're going to close in about 6 minutes. I wonder if any of you just want to share some final thoughts. A final nugget is how it was put in the meeting description. Who's got a nugget? And there was a specific question here about recommendations for particular courses or retreats that you might know of that would be good for supporting wellbeing. So if you know one of those, maybe add that to your nugget. Ben, go for it.
In a nutshell, be the change you want to see. We're coming up at the end of February to what is often referred to as Work Your Proper Hours Day, for example. The end of February typically being the first day in the year when someone starts actually getting paid for the work they do, such is the volume of unpaid overtime we all typically put into our roles without really kind of taking note of. So I think paying attention to those issues of just how much do you do that's above and beyond what you're supposed to, monitoring it and then seeking actively to reduce it, taking proper breaks, not taking on all of those extra mile things because you feel obliged to, or it's interesting, even though you know you're too really tired to be able to do it justice, is the surest fire way of being able to identify what those resource gaps are, so that there can be more frank discussions with employer settings to say, if we do feel this is important, we're going to do it, this is the level of additional resource probably required to be able to do it properly without just relying on that goodwill. So ration your goodwill, I would say, be the change, because goodwill is a finite resource that you can't just keep giving and giving without getting something back. Really good advice. Thanks, Ben. Laura or Tamsin, do you want to jump in with your nugget? I'm really enjoying that word.
So do the first nuggets. I think just firstly to say, like, I appreciate that some people on this call might be currently experiencing some, mental, physical health issues. Like, no work is worth losing or, being of detriment to your mental and physical health. And I really want to say that. I know it's not always easy to just leave work the next day. I certainly can't. I'm not independently wealthy. However, I would say if your organisation isn't changing, then please have an exit strategy for how you can leave, even if that's going to be in a year or two's time. Do you need to do training? Do you need to get mentoring? Who do you need to talk to? Do you need to, start proactively looking and applying for jobs? I'd also say, please do look after your mental and physical health. I'm going to put a link to Mind, and there's obviously lots of different helplines you can call. Go to your doctor. Please, please, please don't kind of allow your work to impact really, really badly on your mental and physical health, because it can have a very long-term impact after you've left a workplace. And just to people who are in positions of power, like, as I said before, this isn't a fluffy thing. This is really serious. Please, please, please follow the advice that people have given today, and make wellbeing a really central part of your operations, because your staff are the most important thing you have. If all of the staff left, we would not have any museums. We would just have buildings. So please see them as an asset and look after them.
And two things from me. You are easily replaced at work, but you are not easily replaced at home. Okay, that's a really important message. A problem shared is a problem halved. I absolutely support that. I think sometimes having a conversation with somebody about what your concerns are, validate those concerns. If you're certainly experience them as being sort of doubtful, am I imagining this? And that can certainly come depending on the nature of the wellbeing issue. If you are somebody that works in community engagement, I cannot highly not recommend @Glam Cares. So please look up @Glam Cares. So they're a group of people looking after the support of people that work with communities within libraries, galleries, archives and museums. And of course, have a look at our Wellbeing Hub and let me know what else you would like to see shared.
Thanks, Tamsin. I think that is going to bring us to a close. So the recording is going to be made available of this session in due course. And if you've got any further questions about the EMA's work in this area, please email cpd@museumsassociation.org, and I'll put that email in the chat as well. And thank you all so much. Thank you to the, look at that, it just appeared miraculously. Thanks so much for all of the input in the chat. That was really fascinating. And thank you to our three panelists, to Ben, Laura and Tamsin. See you all again soon, I hope. Take care. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, folks. Bye now. Look after yourselves.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.